Welcome back to our ongoing look at the story of Jesus as told by the Apostle Matthew. Now, in this selection, we're going to be reading from Matthew chapter 18, verses 23 to 25. And in a sense, for sake of illustrative purposes, I'm going to be reading from two translations, not just the normal one. And I will begin with the King James Version, which of course has been the standard bearer in the English language since the 1600s. Matthew chapter 18 and beginning at verse 23. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king which would take account of his servants. And when he begun to reckon, one was brought unto him which owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. Now let me turn to a more recent English translation. This is from the Williams translation, Matthew chapter 18 and verse 23. So the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who decided to settle up his accounts with his slaves. And when he began, a man was brought to him who owed him $10 million. And because he could not pay it, his master ordered him to be sold, yea, even his wife and children, and all he had, and payment to be made. Now, so the second translation is from the Williams translation. And a quick check, without knowing whether there's revisions done from the original text, the Williams translation is originally copyrighted 1937. So why is that significant and important? Because in the original Williams translation, I presume that $10 million was the figure that the translator used in 1937. Why did he use $10 million? Because in 1937, $10 million was a lot of money. Now, take the word millionaire. We have a sense of what that word means. But what did it originally mean? A millionaire was originally a person who had, surprise, surprise, $1 million, and in particular, $1 million US. And that's a big difference because $1 million Australian or $1 million Canadian may not necessarily be $1 million American. Now, this leads me to this point. When we look at a passage like this, one of our problems is that when we go back to the original text, in this case in the New Testament, we're talking about the Greek in which the original text was written. One of the challenges for translating are two things, numbers and money. And the reason for this is that these are, as much as anything, cultural values, for lack of a better term. Somebody who does this stuff might not like my imprecision with terms here. But cultural values are tough because it's hard to translate something that has a cultural value over here into another language which has another set of cultural values. Because you can be literal and not translate it. So if you look at the two texts, one says 10,000 talents and one says $10 million. Do either of them actually capture a sense of what it means? You know, for example, in my part of the world, I live just outside of the greater Toronto area. And in recent times, you can find houses on the market for $1 million. Now, understand, I'm not talking about palatial mansions. I'm talking about what are considered common, ordinary gay family homes. Is a millionaire anything to be today? No, it's not. $1 million does not mean very much. And so a millionaire, as somebody who has $1 million, does not speak as it once did of somebody rich, though the term millionaire is often used to speak of somebody who's rich. Notice, we continue to use a word even though its original sense and meaning has become lost. You see, when you look at this passage, it is using, first off, a money term that is not easily translated. In the original King James, it talks about a talent. Now, a talent is approximately $1 million in straight literal translation. But $1 million does not mean that much. The exact Greek word for 10,000, as in 10,000 talents, now the one translation says 10 million, but it's actually 10,000 talents is the original Greek, and that's what the King James has, is 10,000. Well, that word 10,000 actually comes into the English language. There's a word that is spelled M-Y-R-I-A-D, myriad, which means a lot. And it is, in its roots, comes out of the Greek word for 10,000. The key for us today is to understand the number sense in Jesus' day. Now, 10,000 to us is a large number, but it's not an excessively large number. $10,000 will not buy you much of a car today. $10,000 today will not, in my part of the world, probably equal a down payment on a house. 10,000, though, in the day of Jesus was the largest number available. So in other words, Jesus was using the biggest possible number that he could think of to speak of this person's debt. At the same time, in using talent, he was using the largest currency sense. So these were both largest terms in their day and age. 10,000 in that day and age was the largest number one could think and speak of. In the modern context, think of the word trillion. That's what Jesus was using. Now, that's not an exact equivalent or accurate equivalent, but gives it a sense of the number used in the original parable. If we put our two conclusions together, we are saying that this guy owed his master $1 trillion million. Now, when we read that, we go, that is nonsensical. And you understand the passage. That's the point. The amount that this person owed completely was bonkers. It made absolutely no sense. This is important, for Jesus was not saying that this person owed a substantial sort of debt that with some creative financing can be dealt with. Jesus was using hyperbole. He was saying that this person owed an outlandish amount of money, far beyond what could be repaid in any normal lifetime. Could this person ever pay it back? The answer is no, and that's where the parable starts from. This person had no chance to ever repay the debt. He was fully at the mercy of his master. Does that not sound like you and I before holy God when it comes to our sin? Now notice how this parable goes back to what Jesus has already taught. Jesus said to Peter in Matthew 18:22 that there was to be no limits on forgiving others. The reason is that the debt that is owed to us is minuscule in comparison to the debt we owe to God. You see, what Jesus told Peter in Matthew 18:22 is a reflection of our indebtedness to God. When you grasp the magnitude of your debt, then you will truly forgive others. This is why to be Christian is not just about being forgiven. It is also about the grace that we have and enables us to forgive others. You cannot be Christian and a keeper of debts.